Morning glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. Hugh Hewitt from the Aiel Wasteland on the western border, otherwise known as California. Good morning to you. Get up, get going to work. I'm happy to be in California, not in the Beltway, which is basically a frozen tundra. Now, in Ohio, we call what happened in D.C. yesterday March. But as many of you know, whenever snowstorms strike the Beltway, the world collapses. Now, it was a pretty good snowfall. It was 6 to 7 inches at Reagan National and 10 inches out in the suburb, but it was nothing like lake effect snow. And the reports from around the region, Guy Benson was on with me last night on Special Report, and Guy's headline for today was Fox contributor Google's tree removal. And that's the same as my son. Evidently, the trees in the Beltway fell like the king's forces before Cromwell, as stubble beneath our swords. And so the trees were down everywhere. The transformer in my daughter's backyard in Southern Virginia exploded, which is a nasty shock. But Dominion Energy is soon going to have a new governor to deal with, and maybe they'll get around to repairing their transformers before they blow up. But that's the big story, is that, of course, the government won't work today. But will you notice? Will you actually notice? The very biggest story is schools and Omicron, and I'm going to come back to that after I run through the headlines. Financial Times, Omicron surge and winter storms stall return to work in the United States. There are so many Omicron headlines. COVID-19 cases soar to new records in the United States. It's 400,000 cases a day. On average, 7-day head count of people hospitalized with COVID in the United States is 100,000, lower than our previous two surges. Omicron is simply much less deadly. Doesn't mean that it's not deadly. Does mean that it's deadly primarily for the unvaccinated and those who haven't gotten boosters and those with underlying conditions. It is not an excuse to shutter schools. It is like a flu outbreak in a school. And so if you're feeling sick, don't go to school. But teachers must go to school, and staff must go to school, and governors are now facing a Patco moment like Reagan did with the air traffic controllers early in his tenure. Governors, most of them, I'm acquainted with a few state constitutions, certainly in California, can fire whomever they want if they impede his actions in an emergency. So it is time to decertify school teacher unions and school staff unions if they are not working. Indeed, they just put out on Twitter, I know Leader McConnell does not want to have an agenda to run on, a legislative agenda, because he's realistic. They will not pass anything over the infirmity of the president's ability to grasp. He's lost his mandate. He never had a mandate. But they still ought to think about campaigning on a federal statute that stipulates if you accept federal money, you cannot have a teachers union school district. If you accept federal money, you cannot have a staff union. We are getting rid of public employee unions in schools. You can put up with them in the prison guards. You can put up with them in the bus drivers of metropolitan districts, but it's got anything to do with schools. Schools get a lot of federal money. The spending clause, now there's an argument that the decision in Obamacare would stop the federal government from doing this, but I don't think so. They certainly could condition future funding on it, and if you accepted COVID money, you will decertify teachers union. We just have to decertify teachers union. Chicago, Detroit, Cleveland, Baltimore, they're all shuttered. And by the way, remote learning is not learning at all. Remote learning is is snow days. That's all it is. And I know some teachers, by the way, open up the phones, Ben. I'm going to take all calls today on schools and parents. And if you're a teacher and you want to tell me it's too dangerous to go to work, call me up and I will tell you it's time for you to quit. If it's too dangerous for you to go to school, you have had a year to get a vaccination, 2, in fact, and a booster. Soon there will be a 4th booster because Israel is now up to the 4th booster for people who are 60 and older and underlying conditions and healthcare workers. And we should just outsource our policy to Israel. But that's 1-800-520-1234. Parents of students are welcome to call because they are hopping mad. By the way, I said last night on Special Report, I'll play in the next segment, If you go to the CDC website, CDC is a completely collapsed agency. They have no ability to message. Dr. Fauci thinks going on the Sunday shows and talking to the same 4 million people. And there are 4 million people who watch the Sunday shows, like one night of Fox. He thinks those 4 million people are the only ones that matter. He is talking to the tiniest segment of America. He's talking to Twitter, and he has a thin skin like the baseball commissioner who managed to get someone fired who said, appropriately and correctly, Rob Manfred's a disaster and the worst commissioner that any professional sport has ever had. He is. He's way in above his head. He's like Dr. Fauci at CDC. Their expiration date has come and they ought to be fired. So other headlines, COVID-19 cases soar to New Yorkers. We knew that. Southeast U.S. poised for a firestorm of Omicron cases with few safeguards in place. This is in the Washington Post and the continuing effort to delegitimize Ron DeSantis, who's doing it the way that the free state of Florida does it, which is, here are the vaccines, here are the boosters. We need more monoclonal antibodies, we need the antiviral pills, and then we're just going to be Florida. AOC, of course, found Florida a very nice place to be during the winter break. It's chaos, says the New York Times, as schools confront Omicron. No, it's not. It's union kvetching. And as I said again on Special Report last night, New York City Mayor Eric Adams, for the first time in 8 years, somebody cares what a New York City mayor said, has gotten off on the right foot by saying schools are staying open. Some parents got emails on Sunday night that schools were going to be closed on Monday. That is so erratic, so irrational, so irresponsible of schools to do. To parents who are working and need to arrange for childcare and don't have computers, it's, for the left, who wants to find racism in everything, closing schools is the most racist thing the United States does if we judge by disparate impact. Because wealthy white kids are going to be fine. They'll get tutors, they'll go to private schools, and by the way, enroll your kid in a private school. Just pull them out, start homeschooling, find a private school, dig deep, do what my parents did, part of your budget, go to the local Catholic school, go to the local Jewish school, go to the local school and say, what will you take? Because I got to get out of public school. They've lost tens of thousands of students, and it's time that they lost more. But I digress. It's not chaos, it's school unions. Now, this was an interesting headline as a result in the Wall Street Journal. COVID brings America's beer versus liquor rivalry to a head. I was unaware of that. I was unaware there was a rivalry. And by the way, there's no time to talk about the Browns-Steelers game last night, sadly. Fentanyl overdoses become number one cause of death among U.S. adults aged 18 to 45. This is a story from Fox News. More adults between 18 and 45 died of fentanyl overdoses in 2020 than COVID, motor vehicle accidents, cancer, and suicide. It's a pandemic that the government is doing nothing about because it won't control the southern border. Fentanyl comes into the United States in a lot of ways. Most of it is now being synthetically produced in Mexico and is being shipped over the border, which Joe Biden has declared open and refuses to do anything about. I don't think he's aware of it. Wall Street Journal today, Senator Schumer's filibuster stunt. The majority leader will again try to blow up the Senate to blow up valid state election laws. I am happy about this. Bring up the filibuster vote. And Cortez Masto, Hassan, Kelly in Arizona, these are all senators, Bennett in Colorado, all these senators, let them go on the record that they're radical and in favor of changing longstanding policy on legislation in the United States to make the Senate a purely majoritarian body. Let them do that. What that will do is expose them and further weaken them. Adam Laxalt's going to win in Nevada. Nevada has been crushed by Biden policies on Omicron. They are crushed by so many other things, and they're going to toss out Cortez Masto, who's born. Colorado might. Colorado's sick of it, too. Finally, crypto CEO Brian Armstrong buys a Los Angeles home for $133 million. This is the fellow who started Coinbase. When anyone buys a $133 million house who has been in an industry for a very short period of time, think Theranos. And think, maybe that's not a company that I can trust. I'll be right back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt. Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt inside the Aiel waste that is California. I'm on the western border of Hugh Hewitt land, and I'm joined by David Drucker inside the Beltway, no doubt snowbound. I doubt the Washington Examiner went to work yesterday. And, David, in Ohio, we call this weather March. I'm not sure why D.C. shuts down.
I laugh because every time I cover campaigns in the Midwest, Iowa, Ohio, Michigan, wherever, they laugh at this kind of weather and they just keep on going. But in D.C., it was a snow day, and today's another snow day because of fear of treacherous travel. I mean, we're still working, but my kids are home.
So I am of the opinion that Ron DeSantis is setting a model for governors everywhere. The president can't do anything about school unions because it's a governor's authority. But there are emergency powers vested in almost every state governor. I think they can fire the teachers if they don't go to work. I think that a governor can do that. I think DeSantis will. What do you think about schools being closed at this 2 years into the pandemic when we fully are aware of the consequences of school closure?
Well, look, I don't think there's any I should say this. I think there's very little political will for it on both sides of the aisle. One of the things that I find encouraging but also very interesting is that some of the sharpest pushback to both lockdowns and school closures has been coming from Democratic governors and Democratic officials. Some of them are not going to be as pointed or aggressive in their language about it because the teachers' unions are allies of the Democratic Party and important allies from a political perspective. But I can just tell in looking at Colorado Governor Jared Polis, the new mayor of New York, Eric Adams, even from the White House, there's just very little appetite for this sort of thing, as there should be at this point, given all we know about the virus, given the vaccines and the therapeutics we have, and given how we know this impacts kids.
No, I've got a primary age granddaughter whose school is not going to have art, music, or any special activities for months because of, quote, staffing shortages. And again, I have the same reaction. Fire the people who don't go to work. And, you get 5 days off with Omicron, and you might get Omicron. In fact, everyone's going to get Omicron, I think. Have you had it yet, David?
Knock on wood, I have not had it, but I had COVID pre-vaccine.
So you've got lots of antibodies. You've got lots of antibodies. You have natural.
Well, either way, I've been through it, and look, I think that I think what we're doing is getting to a point where we realize this thing is not going away, and therefore we're beginning to treat it like we treat the flu. I think we're at the very beginning stage of this, but this seems to me to be where we are headed.
Well, that's what I've said it last night on Special Report. I'll say it again. It is an endemic illness. Don't go to work if you're sick. If you get sick, go home. But everybody go to work unless you're sick. And don't wait around to get tested. I do not get the testing obsession. Unless you're flying somewhere and you don't want to infect an airplane or you have to do a public event. I watched the Steelers-Browns game last night, if you want to call it that. And there are 80,000 people there to cheer Big Ben's last game at Heinz. And none of them are wearing masks. It's just a stupid. Masks outdoors are now stupid. We know they're stupid. Cloth masks are stupid. That came out yesterday. We just know what works and what doesn't work, David. And I think Republicans will be all over this. And I think Ron DeSantis is setting the example.
Well, look, I would say this about Ron DeSantis, I think I've written this, and I wrote this in 2021 at some point. What he is really doing with his administration in Florida is something I had not seen often from governors. I'm trying to remember the last time I had seen it, but he is fighting the culture war as a conservative from a governor's mansion in a way we don't normally see governors do, even when they decide to run for president and then do so. Normally governors, look, they got to make the trains run on time. They have to fix potholes. They have to deal with the other party because of how their legislatures may be. It's a very complicated business, actually, to be a governor and then run for president in this day and age, given how culture is supreme in our politics. DeSantis is doing that from a political standpoint in a way that sets him up to be a very viable presidential candidate if he wants to be. And we've seen other governors, at least a couple in my view, follow his lead, use his model. Governor Greg Abbott in Texas is one. South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem is another. But he's really set a different sort of standard for governors from a conservative perspective and how you fight the culture war and not just simply make the trains run on time.
Yeah, crystal balls are always cloudy, but my crystal ball says Senators Cotton, Cruz, and Tim Scott, Governor DeSantis, and Mike Pompeo are the top tier of Republican candidates. Some people can quarrel with that and put Rick Scott into that, and a couple of other people, maybe Greg Abbott. But it's going to require combativeness. Every one of those individuals is combative in their own way. Tim Scott's the gentlest of that. 20 seconds, David. Do you agree with that? You've got to be combative against
You've got to be combative. Look, I wrote about this in Trump Shadow. You've got to show voters you want to fight. Republican voters in any event, they want that.
That is the bottom line. In Trump's Shadow lays it out. Go and get it today and come back for the next hour. Thank you, David M. Drucker on Twitter. In Trump's Shadow is his book on the 2024 race. I'll be right back, hour 2 of the Tuesday edition in the new year of the Hugh Hewitt Show. Morning glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. Hugh Hewitt from the Aiel Waste. That is a geographic location in the Robert Jordan Wheel of Time series, otherwise known as California. I will be here for a few months because I don't like winter anymore. Even though I grew up in Ohio, and even though what happened in the Beltway yesterday is what we in Buckeye Land would simply call March, I still wanted to talk to people in the Beltway. So Byron York has been left behind to file dispatches from behind Beltway lines. Good morning, Byron York. How are you?
Good morning, Hugh. I'm doing fine, thank you.
Did you get out of your house yesterday?
No, actually, I didn't. Snowed a little more than we thought, about 7 inches around my house. Didn't need to go out, so I didn't.
You know, that is indeed what we call March in Ohio. I am amazed by the Beltway. But let me move on to Ron DeSantis, because on Sunday I wrote a column for the Washington Post. My top tier, looking ahead and anticipating fundraising, volunteers, issue sets. I say it's Tom Cotton and it's Mike Pompeo, it's Ted Cruz, it's Tim Scott, and it's Ron DeSantis. And if there's a front runner, this is all assuming Trump doesn't run. If there's a front runner, it's got to be Ron DeSantis. And I greatly approve of his handling of this. What do you think of DeSantis and his, first of all, he wouldn't be goaded into appearing when he didn't want to appear. And then secondly, came out and just roundhoused the national news media yesterday.
Well, look, he's been really, really effective. And I think there's one thing that's going on that's kind of interesting, is that for 20 years, from the election of Bill Clinton through the emergence of Donald Trump, there was a lot of belief that governors had the inside track in becoming president. That kind of went away in 2008 with the McCain versus Obama race, but still a lot of Republicans, I think, kind of believed that executive experience was a really, really big deal in choosing your candidate for president. Obviously, that all went out the window with Donald Trump, who didn't have any governmental experience. So where do things stand now? DeSantis has, as governor of Florida, huge state, the best platform to show his governing ability. And I think he's really made good use of it during this COVID thing. This latest thing he's talking about with monoclonal antibodies just shows the difference between a solution-oriented, bureaucracy-cutting governor and a federal government that seems to me, you mentioned the idea that they just didn't order enough monoclonal antibodies. They wanted federal control of them. I also think there's a rigidity of thinking involved here in which they believe so deeply in vaccines, which do work, but to the exclusion of everything else. As a matter of fact, you've not seen the White House make a big deal of this coming pill from Pfizer and from Merck that will actually do the work that monoclonal antibodies do now, except it's not an infusion. You just take a pill. It's a huge, huge thing for people who get
Byron,
COVID in the early stages.
Let me ask you a question about this, because I agree with you. The White House has totally developed the wrong metrics by which to measure. They've allowed themselves to be trapped by testing efficacy. I am not a doctor, nor did I stay at a Holiday Inn. Testing with an asymptomatic transmission does no good. I got tested before I flew because I didn't want to infect an airplane, and I'd been near someone. But I just think this emphasis on, a billion tests or whatever it is just stupid. It doesn't do a thing when you have asymptomatic transmission. You're good for a day.
They're stuck in inflexibility and rigidity of thinking. They worry that if people believe there's an easy and effective treatment, then maybe they won't get vaccines, and they know they're so totally fixated on vaccines, which all this indicates. It's not that vaccines are bad or people shouldn't get vaccinated. They should. But you can't think of just one thing to the exclusion of everything else, and this is what DeSantis is showing. And in the process, he's showing himself to be a really effective executive, and I think that in this coming race, Trump being the wild card, you're going to see the executive experience sort of reemerge as a factor in a Republican primary. And of that group that you mentioned, DeSantis is the one who has it.
Pompeo has it at State and CIA.
Pompeo's been Secretary of State, and Tim Scott's been a senator. So you've got a bunch of senators, which you always have, and then you have a governor.
Yeah, the Cruz case is built on history that the Republican Party has a muscle memory of passing the baton to whoever finishes second. The Cotton and Pompeo candidates will be based on a developing urgency about national security, which does not yet exist, but which I believe will issue after Afghanistan gets its terrorists organized and sends them out to the world, and China seizes Taiwan and Putin invades Ukraine. Tim Scott's just a wonderful guy, and the country wants racial reconciliation. They don't want George Floyd protests, and he's an eloquent guy. Rick Scott does the other one of the six. One of my key rules: if you're not on Fox television a lot, you are not communicating with the base. Yes, it's important to be on the Hugh Hewitt show. Yes, it's important to be on with Mike Gallagher and other talk show hosts and Mark Levin. But you cannot not be on Fox and be a serious contender. I think, Byron, just judging from my inbox, I've communicated with more Republican voters in 5 weeks of doing Special Report on a regular basis than I did in 5 years on NBC. I really believe that. What do you I mean, it's a factual matter. Nobody on our team watches NBC. They've given up on them. And I suspect that's true about CBS and ABC. They are exclusively Fox viewers.
Well, I don't think you should narrow it to, quote, our team. If you look at the ratings, just on a typical evening, maybe there is one non-Fox program in the top 10.
Yes.
And there are 2 or 3 non-Fox programs in the top 20, and the highest rated CNN program is maybe 24, 25, 26. This is total dominance right now, and it's not just Republicans. You're right. Republicans are watching Fox News, and any candidate who wants to communicate with them needs to be on Fox News. But Fox News is reaching a lot of independents and a lot of Democrats.
Yes.
More
and Special
than the
Report
other networks reach on Republicans.
You do Special Report. I think it's the last real news show. I honestly believe it's the last real news show in America. Everybody else on cable, and there are 30-minute news shows with Lester Holt, and those are news shows, but they don't have any political content. They're just sort of, the Beltway is snowed in sort of thing. The last meaningful show in America in which serious conversation takes place is Special Report. That's not completely opinion journalism. It's a news show. You agree with that assessment?
Yeah, that is correct. It is the serious news show, and created by Brit Hume, carried on by Bret Baier, and also going on at a time when the broadcast networks died. And with flexibility, the flexibility of cable news, if something huge is happening, they can just throw out the plan and cover that. The panel had been an enduring popular feature, especially the many years of appearances by Charles Krauthammer. So, no, it's really the best.
Oh, I was so happy last night. I enjoyed doing it with you, but Britt, Susan, Paige, and Guy made up a super panel of which I was a part, and I just liked that. Let me ask you, you're a Fox News contributor. I am not, so I'm a free agent. So I can say this, and you may not be able to comment on it. I think if they put Bret Baier on Sunday morning, they will crush the opposite. The Sunday shows are sort of empty fortresses waiting to be overrun. And if they put Bret, and Chris Wallace was not effectively connected with the center-right and independents in America, I think if Bret hosts that show, they will swamp the competition. What do you think? Can you even answer that?
Well, here is the deal. I am a Fox News contributor. I am not a Fox News executive.
Right.
And I think I will let those decisions leave it to the people who actually run the network.
All right, so I don't have to worry about that because I am not, and so I can be their executive in absentia. Let me close by going back to my list. Other governors are out there. I think they need to pick Patco moments with school unions. I think they have to decertify school unions. You know, Chicago, Cleveland, Detroit, Baltimore. Larry Hogan could decertify the Baltimore school union and become an instant front-runner candidate. Do you think any of these Republican governors will look for those moments and crush unions that stay away from school?
I think that is an opportunity because the whole education issue brought to the fore by COVID has really produced sort of two different issues. One is the question of wokeness in education, something that really drives a lot of parents completely nuts. And two is the culpability of the teachers' unions in keeping schools closed when it was terrible for children. So some politician is certainly going to take advantage of that.
I hope so, and I hope so they do it soon. Kids need to be in school. Byron York, follow him on Twitter at Byron York. See him on the Washington Examiner page every day. Get his newsletter. Of course, watch him on Fox News. I'll be right back, America. 1-800-520-1234. Connection to the Hugh Hewitt Show. Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt, joined by Admiral James Stavridis. Happy New Year's to you, Admiral, retired United States Navy. I hope you're off to a great start.
Indeed. You as well, Hugh. Great to see you in this new year.
Thank you. Admiral, I want to cut to the chase. Last night on Special Report, we talked about Putin's threat. It was Brett Hume's conclusion. It is my conclusion that Putin will not be deterred. He will invade Ukraine a second time and move the men forward that he's got. And it will be bloody. 13,000 fatalities in the last Russo-Ukraine war. Are you as pessimistic as Brett Hume and I are?
My sense, Hugh, is that I'm a little less certain that it will be a full event blitzkrieg kind of invasion where he crosses the Dnieper River and goes to Kiev and creates regime change. I don't think that's where this goes, but let me put a percentage on it. I think there's still a 20% chance that happens. I think the other percentage here is probably more significant hybrid warfare. So that could include, by the way, an invasion where he stops quite short and carves a new chunk out of Ukraine. It could even not include an actual invasion, but has all the other elements: unmarked soldiers, the so-called little green men, massive cyber attacks, social media that undermines Zelensky, deepfake videos, creates division in the country because, as you know, there's already significant division between the ethnically Ukrainian and the ethnically Russians. And that's, of course, what Putin is playing to. So we ought to be very worried about this. It ought to have our full attention. Nothing's going to happen for the next few weeks. We got to wait for the ground to freeze, as the saying goes, so the armor can roll, gives them more options. There are talks next week. There are a few more cards to play. Bottom line, 20% chance of a full all-out invasion. That's low, but it's unacceptably high.
Now, Admiral, yesterday, I was reminded because I had my sister-in-law around, and she was a foreign service spouse in Finland during the Cold War, of the Winter War, and she walked me through, of course, Stalin's famous invasion of Finland in 1939, and the Finns fought back, and they never got to Helsinki. I thought they had gotten to Helsinki, and she corrected me. They didn't get to Helsinki. It was bloody. That was about 25,000 dead over 4 months. And yesterday the Finns announced, the president of Finland said, hey, we might want to join NATO, and our decision is not going to be driven by what Vladimir Putin thinks. Do you think that helps? I do. I think that's what we need in the world, is a bunch of people to say, our decisions are not going to be dictated by this guy. Let's start disintermediating his money abroad.
Completely agree. And by the way, the other potential joiner would be Sweden. We've seen Sweden over the last 6 months, more political statements from their leadership. And it's controversial in both nations for a variety of reasons that would take us a while to unpack. As Americans, if you say to yourself, if I were a Finn right on the Russian border, or I was a Swede, very, very close, you'd say, oh my gosh, I want to be in NATO like right away. They have a little different feel for a variety of different reasons. But the bottom line is this. When I was Supreme Allied Commander of NATO, both the Finns and the Swedes deployed with us, with NATO, on a wide variety of missions. There were Finnish and Swedish troops, for example, in Afghanistan. My personal security was provided in the Balkans by Swedes. And by the way, you should have seen the Vikings they sent down to do that. All 6'4" blonde hair, blue-eyed, with this little Greek admiral. I never felt safer than when I was around the Swedes. They are, both nations are very capable. They have universal conscription. They're highly motivated to maintain their independence. And they're democracies without corruption. It's going to take Ukraine many, many years to get into NATO, to get by the barriers. I always say about Sweden and Finland, tell us on Wednesday you want to join NATO. We'll have you in by Friday. Both nations.
I agree. But let's take the example of the Winter War. Stalin was not expecting what the Finns threw at him. Right. Is there a possibility, as Bert Hume suggested last night, that Putin may not be ready for what the Ukraine has prepared for 5, 6 years now?
I think so. And again, I've visited Ukraine many times. By the way, Ukrainian military units were alongside us in NATO as well. They came along with us on a variety of NATO missions. It's a military that knows how to fight. And by the way, they've been fighting for the last 5 years. As you said, you look at photographs of southeast Ukraine, it's a war. Bombs, artillery, tanks, troops, etc. This is not an unblooded army on the Ukrainian side. And they will fight. And I think that Brother Putin may find himself with a lot more on his hands, particularly if he rolls out of the Russian side of the country and tries to get into that Ukrainian side. So when I put all that together, what do the Ukrainians need from us? They need weapons. And, not to coin a phrase, but we need Operation Warp Speed 2. And let's get some weapons there while we still have weeks, days, I don't know, maybe months. That can help make it a harder problem for Putin. That's deterrence. And number two, diplomacy, as in rallying the NATO alliance. And then in your back pocket are the sanctions that the president's talked about. Hopefully those three things will hold him off.
Let me go just quickly to the disintermediation of assets banked abroad. Former President Bush in the Oval Office once told a group of journalists who were there, and I was among them, that disintermediation of foreign assets is always a tool available when you're dealing with a corrupt regime. They hide money, and we know where the money is, and we can blink it away. Would you do that now, or would you wait for, and not just Putin, but his cronies? There's an oligarchy in Russia that does have some influence over Putin. Would you start now? Not the whole thing, but if you wake up and 10% of your net worth is gone, maybe you put some pressure on Putin to stop.
I think you do now pick out a couple of examples. I think it would have a very clarifying effect on the rest of the oligarchs if one or two of them suddenly ended up with, 0 bitcoins in their Cayman accounts. And can we do that? Yeah, I'm pretty sure we can. So make an example out of one or two, but I think you do want to hold that card back for the ultimate in bad behavior, which at this point would be a third invasion of a sovereign country. He went into Georgia. He went into Ukraine. This really is a 3 strikes and you're out program, in my view. As an international system, we cannot allow a sovereign state to be invaded again and again and again and have its borders changed. Monetary targeting, precision-guided effect, I think, has a big role to play in deterrence here.
Thank you, Admiral, and thank you for the Sailor's Bookshelf, which I received for Christmas. We'll talk about that when I've read it, and I really, of course, that was my favorite president. I appreciate that you're back at work, I hope, on the next Stavridis book. I know you are, actually. The sequel to 2034, right?
Exactly. 2054, which is a novel about civil conflict in the United States, a very serious topic we ought to be concerned about. Maybe we can discuss that at some point as well.
We will indeed. Admiral, thank you very much. Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt. Jake Sherman, Punchbowl News, first interview of the year. Jake is a regular guest usually on Monday. You should be subscribing to Punchbowl News. Jake and his team keep you completely up to date on what's happening on Capitol Hill, including the suicide charge of Chuck Schumer up the hill, the filibuster hill that's coming between now and Martin Luther King. Am I right about that, Jake? He's committed?
He seems to be. I mean, this is his strongest language so far. He sent a letter to Democrats yesterday, and that we ran this morning in Punchbowl News, that he basically says they're going to have a debate. He doesn't say a vote. He says a debate, I believe, on restructuring or blowing up the filibuster on voting rights. And of course, I think you'd agree, Hugh, that's probably the end of the filibuster if he does that. Because that opens the door to all sorts of changes to the filibuster. Again, we don't know if Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema are going to be for this. Manchin will probably, he's said a million times he's not for changing the 60-vote threshold. Now, could he support other changes? I don't know. We'll have to see. We'll have to see what he says, but Schumer does seem to be committed. It's a little difficult for me to make heads or tails of whether he thinks this will work, whether he expects any changes, or whether he's doing this for the base. But anyway, he's not going to do it this week because Bob Menendez, Democrat from New Jersey, is out this week with a shoulder injury. He had surgery on New Year's Eve. He'll be back next week. So next week is the big week, Hugh. Next week is the week the Senate rules could be considered on the Senate floor.
I hope he does get a vote, Jake. I want to see Cortez Masto, Hassan, Michael Bennet in Colorado, Raphael Warnock in Georgia. Who else am I forgetting? All the other vulnerable Democrats get on the record as supporting a kamikaze attack on minority rights in the United States Senate. I really do. Now, I thought Harry Reid, may God rest his soul, made the catastrophic decision to end the filibuster in 2013. We have a Republican Supreme Court full of originalists because of that. Harry Reid did not get the credit he deserved for the court that we have today. But he does. It's all the Reid rule, right? And Schumer's going to invoke the Reid rule again, which is the ability to change the Senate rules, the continuing body's rules, by simple majority. Previous to the Reid rule, you had to have you had to have 60 votes. Now you can change the rules with 51. If he does this, if he gets a recorded vote, I'm going to applaud, because that means Hassan in New Hampshire and Cortez Masto in Nevada and Warnock in Georgia and Kelly in Arizona and Bennett in Colorado, they'll all have to go on the record. And if they go on the record in favor of blowing up minority rights, they will lose their Senate seats, Jake.
Yeah, well, here's a question for you, Hugh. I mean, I don't know that that's the case. Here's my question for you, and I honestly don't know the answer to this. Let's say, I think this is far from a done deal. I think Manchin and Sinema have said a million times they're not for this, and I'm not sure they vote for this at the end of the day. Manchin has said any change to the Senate rules needs to be done on a bipartisan basis, and that's where he's been all along, so I don't know that he'll change. But let's just play for a minute here and say he does go along and they do change the rules. How does McConnell handle that if he's in the majority? Does he...
Oh, we roll over the Democrats. Goose for the gander, right? And when there is a Republican president and a majority in the Senate and a majority in the House, and we'll have a majority in the House come November, I'm a transparent Republican, and I want to have Speaker McCarthy and I want to have Leader McConnell. They will simply roll over. It's a disaster for minority party rights, and we will have political swings. It's a disaster public policy. But, Jake, I heard Joe Manchin tell Brett Baer on Sunday, the 19th of December, he will not vote to change the filibuster. Kyrsten Sinema has not said anything to make me believe she would either. I think it's all showmanship to keep AOC from running against him in a primary, and I don't think it's going to work. My question to you is, you just made a distinction I hadn't heard before. If he has this long debate and he doesn't vote, doesn't his base go crazy?
Well, I think I think his theory would be that, and Warnock said this too, and Raphael Warnock from Georgia, he said that we haven't even had the debate, and that's what he's looking for. He's looking to bring this to the fore, which is an understandable position. I don't think that is that crazy for somebody who's in support of blowing up the filibuster. But I don't know that they go crazy, because I think in his calculus, Schumer's calculus would be it snuffs out Manchin and it forces him on the record. And that's kind of where they are with Manchin, is that they want him on the record on all these issues, and they just don't want him only talking. They want him on the record. And I think, so I don't think he would think that is bad for his base. I think he would view that, and his base theoretically would view that as Schumer fighting to blow up the filibuster. And I get that. So I actually disagree with you on that. I don't think his base would go crazy. I think they just blame Manchin. They blame Manchin for everything else anyway. So I'm
saying not having a vote. If he doesn't have a vote, I think his base will go crazy. If he does have a vote, Maggie Hassan's done. Mark Kelly is done, because this is not a popular move. People like the United States government to go slow and do little.
Yeah, and as you know, I think people don't in the public recognize how big of the swings in public policy there would be if there were no filibuster.
That, you can't write that often enough. It would be the most destabilizing thing other than the expansion of the Supreme Court, which would be the end of the rule of law in America. Jake Sherman, good to talk to you. Follow him at Jake Sherman. Go subscribe to Punchbowl News if you want to be updated every morning. It's the only newsletter I actually want to get in the morning. I'm trying to unsubscribe from everything else, but it spreads like kudzu. Not Punchbowl News. I want that every morning because it makes me smart. Thank you, Jake Sherman. I'll be right back. Hour number 3 coming up on the Hugh Hewitt Show. Morning, glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada, and greetings, everyone. First live broadcast of 2022 from the West Coast, the ideal wasteland, what I call California. I'm joined by my first elected official of 2022, Senator Joni Ernst from Iowa. Good morning, Senator. Happy New Year to you.
Well, Happy New Year, Hugh. It's great to be with you.
Before I move to Senator Schumer's threat to try and destroy the Senate, I'd like to cover what you are working on the mall, because I believe I was on the mall, the fetching Mrs. Hewitt and I walked the mall on Christmas when it was beautiful before the snowstorm, and it does need what you are proposing, and boy, do the Afghan veterans especially need this. I know you've been working with my friend John Andrazik on a couple of Afghanistan issues, but even more broadly, the veterans of the global war on terror deserve their space.
Yes, absolutely, Hugh. And we do have final authority now. The bill was actually signed into law by the president just about a week ago. We have reached the conclusion of the legislative efforts to put the Global War on Terrorism Memorial on our national mall, where it rightly belongs beside many other war memorials. Yes, our Afghan veterans, our Iraq veterans, they do need to know that America appreciates their selfless service and sacrifice. After 20 years, our longest war of an all-volunteer force. So you're right. This needs to happen. We need a place of remembrance and healing. We've had a lot of great supporters. You mentioned John Andrazik. He has been a fantastic supporter of this effort. Gary Sinise, Milo Ventimiglia, so many others have really joined in publicly, and of course the American people want to see it there as well.
Do we have a site selected yet, Senator Ernst, and is there a committee going about raising money? And I think if big tech has got a brain among them, they will all fund this in about one day. Do we have a committee, et cetera? Because the Eisenhower Memorial got caught up in controversy, took forever. The World War II Memorial got caught up in controversy, took forever. The Vietnam Veterans Memorial got caught up in controversy, took forever. Can we get it done?
We can, and I am so excited about this because we actually established the Global War on Terrorism Memorial Foundation in 2017. So they have been doing and engaging in fundraising efforts, and you're right, hopefully we have a lot of companies out there that will want to engage. They've had a lot of employees, of course, our reservists and National Guardsmen that have served in the Global War on Terror. They should step up. We would love to see that. So it is the Global War on Terrorism Memorial Foundation. They will be handling all of the financing. I want our taxpayers to know and understand that no taxpayer dollars go towards the memorials that are on the National Mall. All of it is privately funded, privately raised, and they will continue to support those efforts. So, again, it's long overdue. We're glad it has reached the congressional conclusion, but there's still a lot of work to be done by the foundation, and hopefully we'll see that memorial here in the next several years. As with the World War II Memorial, you know, Hugh, that so many of those veterans that are finally able to visit their memorial, many of them are passing, and so that greatest generation, they waited far too long to see a memorial. We don't want that to happen.
What about the architect, Senator? Because it's usually the architect who will screw up these things. Because they want to impose their view as opposed to the collective, let's salute the men and women who served. And so we ended up with the Vietnam Veteran Memorial being very special, but they had to add, and they appropriately added, the statue of the soldiers coming out of the jungle. I don't know what this should be. But it ought to be Soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines.
Right, and so that is one thing that we will have to work through the foundation. The foundation will decide on that design, and we will have many people competing to have their representation on the mall. It has to be a true visionary, but it does have to encapsulate all the different pieces of the global war on terrorism and be representative of the men and women that served in uniform during this long period of time after 9/11.
So, Senator Ernst, last question on the memorial. The Presidential Debate Commission is a defunct organization with no credibility that should be abolished because the same people have run it forever. Does the foundation have term limits? Do they have get it done or get off the commission rules? The foundation.
Well, yes, and I would have to go back and double check on that, Hugh. But we have seen people that have said, like Marina Jackman. She was the president of the organization, and her commitment was to make sure it got over the finish line for Congress, and she just stepped out of her position. Now she's being replaced with Michael Rodriguez, who is now going to spearhead those efforts. And so we do see that people are rotating through. They're representing the men and women that served, and hopefully we will see that continue into the future and make sure that this effort does get done and it is representing the men and women in uniform.
Now, Senator, let me turn to Chuck Schumer's threat. I hope he has a vote on the filibuster because I heard Senator Manchin with Brett Baer on December 19th say he's not going to vote to change the filibuster. I doubt that Senator Sinema is either. But I would love to see Senators Hassan, Cortez Masto, Raphael Warnock, Senator Bennett from Colorado, Senator Kelly from Arizona take a stand on the most fundamentally destabilizing thing other than expanding the Supreme Court than the Senate could do. I would love everyone on the record. Do you have any reason to believe that Senator Sinema or Manchin have changed their minds?
I don't, but we have seen in circumstances where Senator Manchin has softened his stance a little bit, where he has said, well, I won't vote to change the filibuster, but, well, maybe in the case of civil rights, which is what they are calling the federalization of elections, that bill, they're calling that civil rights related, which it's not, but he has softened his stance a little bit, and so I hope that he can stand strong. But this is where Chuck Schumer is coming in and saying, okay, well, let's use the elections bill to change the filibuster in the United States Senate. And I'm a former county auditor from Iowa. I was a former commissioner of elections, and I know as someone who worked that ground that our federal government should not take over elections. It is not spelled out as a federal duty in our Constitution, and so this should remain at the state level. But this is what Chuck Schumer is going to use as a turning point in order to run the change to the filibuster on the Senate floor. It would be a radical change to the way we do business in the United States Senate. It would be detrimental and allow the majority, a simple majority, to run roughshod over the minority party.
And I think it would be a disaster for the Republic, but I would love to see Senator Hassan, Senator Cortez Masto, Bennett, Warnock, Kelly, your colleagues, on the record. Do they really want to go on the record on this?
No, they don't. No, they don't, because they will go down then as those that decided that simple majority, the traditions and rules of the Senate have no meaning, and basically changing the way we do business in the Senate forever. They are in very tough states, and they know they take these tough votes, they will likely lose their
they will lose votes over this. The filibuster is popular. Let me last question about Senator Schumer. This seems to me to be driven by his fear of AOC, that he does not want a primary challenge. So he's being base driven. Do you agree with my assessment, and do you think it will stop AOC from challenging Chuck Schumer?
Well, I do think that a lot, not just Chuck Schumer, but many of these Democrats have been driven so far to the left by figures like AOC. And in New York's case, of course, Schumer is going to worry about AOC. You know, she's widely popular with younger voters, but you know, he has to deal with that, and that's how he is choosing to deal with it, by tending to go much further to the left than maybe a lot of the mainstream voters in New York would want to see. So we'll see what he ends up doing, but I think you're right. I think he does it to save his own skin, but it will put a lot of his members in jeopardy.
I agree with that. Senator Ernst, very quickly, any of the Des Moines schools closing, is Des Moines serious about keeping kids in school and the other teacher union-dominated big city districts?
Well, we will see a lot of push from our state government to keep people in school. Iowa has had their children in school since August of 2020, and so it's important that we keep our children in school. We have a Republican governor. We have a Republican House and Senate in Iowa. They will fight to keep those children in school.
Good. I hope they decertify any teachers union that leaves the kids in the lurch. Senator Ernst, good to have you. Happy 2022. I'll be right back, America. Don't go anywhere. First live broadcast of the new year. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt, joined by Hotline Josh. First live broadcast of the year with Josh Kraushaar of National Journal. You ought to read everything Josh writes over at Hotline Josh on Twitter. Josh, good morning. Happy New Year to you.
Happy 2022. Good to be back on the show, Hugh.
So I want to begin with my first column of the year in the Post. I laid out my view of where the Republican field will be in 2024. Right now, Tom Cotton and Mike Pompeo are at 1%. Ron DeSantis is in the pole position. Tim Scott and Ted Cruz are definitely running. And Rick Scott will have a big win if he gets the Senate back as chairman of the National Republican Senatorial Committee. What do you make of my assessments looking ahead?
Yeah, well, if Trump doesn't run, which was your premise of your column, you know,
Right.
I agree with DeSantis. You know, I think Mike Pence, by virtue of name ID and organization, is going to be someone to watch very closely. And Ted Cruz, those are the top three in my book at this early stage. Tim Scott, the South Carolina senator, is someone also worth watching closely. He's someone who could be a wild card, and it does look like he has perhaps ambitions beyond South Carolina. But you know, we were talking about this before, Hugh. I think there's going to be a sweet spot politically in the Republican primary to find someone who's seen as electable, and also someone who checks enough of the Trump and conservative boxes. Youngkin kind of proved the model in Virginia. I'm not sure if that's the right model that's going to work nationally for the Republican Party in 2024, but I think there's going to be something of a hybrid that's going to emerge. And I also think I can't discount the importance of retail politics in Iowa and New Hampshire. What plays well on Fox News, what plays well nationally with a conservative audience might be different than winning over the hearts and minds of those Iowa caucus voters and the New Hampshire Republican primary voters. So that's
you know, Josh, on that point, some of the never Trumpers were yelling at me online yesterday because I mentioned Cotton and Pompeo. They are apparently unaware that both of those guys are playing to overflow crowds in both of those states. They're doing retail politics. Yep. Issue set is the variable. We don't know if we're going to be attacked out of Afghanistan a month before the primaries begin. We don't know if Taiwan will have been invaded. We don't know what Putin will do. If national security becomes the issue, the senators have an advantage.
That's a great point. I mean, we don't know if there's an invasion of Ukraine, God forbid, you know, what we're talking about now may seem quaint by the time 2023 rolls around. So that's why making a lot of these prognostications beyond the big picture can be very, very risky. Cotton on national security is as strong as any Republican that would be running in 2024. Pompeo, obviously, his stature as Secretary of State under Trump, his visibility would put him on the map. You know, and I think Pompeo specifically has spent more time among all the prospective candidates.
Oh my gosh, is he working hard? He's there. I mean, he's on the road every day. And I stay in touch with all these guys, with the exception of Ron DeSantis, very closely. Let me close by asking you about the governor and schools. There's an opportunity for Glenn Youngkin to have a Patco moment like Reagan did with public schools in Virginia. He's already appointed a very no-nonsense superintendent. If he fires people who get in the way of education, if he takes over school districts that are failing to educate, as happened in Compton in the 90s in California when the state took over, Youngkin could be viable. Any Republican who forces the confrontation with these unions will be a winner, Josh. This is a Tea Party moment for the country.
Yeah, education is going to be the biggest issue in Virginia as Governor-elect Youngkin takes office. Now, it's interesting. The politics of what happened in November has, made Virginia actually change their policies. I'm not aware of any Virginia school districts, as contrasted to last year, that have decided to close down, or maybe one or two. But it's been a sea change just because Youngkin was elected. The politics of the state asserted itself. They don't want to. They know where public opinion is now. So I think the bigger thing is what you said at the outset, Hugh, that a lot of the people at the top of the State Board of Education, state school superintendent, state superintendent, there's going to be cleaning house.
Josh, I know from emails from parents that some schools are hiding and reducing extracurriculars, music, art, things like that. Yeah. They're hiding. Yeah. They're slow down because they don't want to get fired. But I think Youngkin ought to go ferret them out and fire them.
Well, here's the bigger issue that I think is going to come up pretty soon. The schools are going to be open, but they're going to require, tests that kids will, if they're exposed, they're going to have to isolate for 10 days. Under the current CDC policy, which is creating almost a situation as bad as closures.
Agree, and I think he's going to end that. Josh, you got 1 minute. I got to ask you, does the emphasis on testing make any sense to you? I think it's a complete faceplant.
Well, first of all, there's not enough tests, so there's not enough supply, and it's not going to be resolved by the time the peak likely will be in place. And there are now a lot of prominent scientists. There was a column in the Atlantic this morning that we only should be doing what the NFL does, only testing people with symptoms. That given that there's a shortage and there are times you do need testing, but to test in schools for asymptomatic cases is probably not the wisest use of resources, given that there's a shortage and given that there's so much spread among everyone throughout the entire country.
It's amazing. Someone else pointed out we had $130 billion spent on schools to support them during the COVID relief. They do not appear to have spent it at all on anything that works. And not all schools, just Chicago, Cleveland, Detroit, Baltimore, various school districts in Virginia. Josh Kraushaar is in the Beltway reporting every day. Follow him at Hotline Josh on Twitter. Follow National Journal as well. Josh hadn't got me a free subscription yet. I don't know what to do about that, but I'll keep working him. Thank you, Generalissimo. Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Ben and Harley. Thanks all of you for listening. I'll be back tomorrow on the next live Hugh Hewitt Show.